There is something in the air as the full moon approaches, and on the night of June 29th, that something intensifies in a way that many people can only describe later when they can no longer ignore it. It is not just the silvery brightness flooding the windows, nor the denser silence that seems to settle over the streets after midnight. It is an internal movement, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, that gradually turns into a kind of calling. Dreams too vivid to be forgotten over breakfast. Old thoughts that resurface out of nowhere, bringing back memories that seemed buried for years. Strange sensations in the chest, in the solar plexus, in the nape of the neck, as if something inside you were trying to draw attention to something the rational mind cannot yet name. And it is precisely at this point that most people make the mistake of their lives. They ignore it. They attribute it to stress, to insomnia, to too much caffeine, to that strange conversation at work. And they go back to sleep, back to the routine, back to autopilot. But those who remain attentive, who choose not to extinguish these signs, discover that this specific moment in the lunar calendar functions as a kind of portal, a rare window where the veil between what we are on the outside and what we are on the inside becomes thin enough for some truths to cross over. Truths about who you really are, about what was keeping you from living the life you feel, deep down, you should be living, about the fears you inherited without realizing it, about the beliefs that have carried you for decades, but that were never yours. And if you are watching this now at this very moment, it is not by chance. Some would say it is a coincidence. I prefer to call it a calling, because what follows completely changes the way you see yourself, your mind, and the universe in which you believed you lived until today. To understand why this specific night carries so much weight, one must first understand something that traditional science has preferred to keep silent for decades, and the story of an ordinary man ended up dismantling this strategy of silence. His name was Robert Monroe. He was not a mystic. He was not a guru. He was not someone who spent hours meditating in caves or who had any interest in anything that smelled of esotericism. Robert was an American radio industry executive, a practical, rational, busy man, skeptical by temperament and by training. He had a wife, daughters, bills to pay, endless meetings. His life was the perfect portrait of mid-20th century Western normality, until the night everything began to change. He was lying in bed, about to fall asleep, when he felt, for the first time, a vibration that seemed to course through his entire body, from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. It was not pain. It was not exactly fear. It was something absurdly intense, as if a soft electric current were running through every cell at the same time. He got up startled, walked through the house, drank water, checked if there was any poorly insulated electrical wire nearby. Nothing. He went back to bed. And the vibration returned. Night after night, without warning, without apparent cause. He sought out doctors. He had tests done. Everything was within the expected range. It was in this process of trying to understand that he had the first experience that would mark his life forever, and later would mark the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the world. Amidst the vibration, he felt that something inside him was detaching. That part of who he was rose, floated, and looked down at his own body lying on the bed. His wife was sleeping beside him. The room was exactly the same. And he was there, conscious, lucid, observing the scene from a point of view that the science of the time would say was impossible. Robert did not believe it. He thought he was going crazy. He sought psychiatric help. The doctors found nothing, and that was when he made the decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to run away from the phenomenon, he decided to study it. He documented every experience. He noted down every sensation. He refined methods to induce this state in a controlled manner. And what began as the private problem of a skeptical executive transformed over time into a body of knowledge that would cross borders, institutions, and generate research that many to this day prefer not to discuss out loud. Because what Robert demonstrated, and what other researchers after him confirmed, is something deeply disturbing to a worldview built solely upon physical senses. Consciousness does not appear to be limited to the brain. It seems to extend far beyond it. And anyone at all can access this fact for themselves, given the right conditions. As Robert delved deeper into his own experiences, he realized something even more unsettling. What seemed to be merely leaving the body was, in fact, a journey through territories. Not geographical territories as we understand them in the physical world, but regions of consciousness, layers of reality. Environments that responded to different laws than those we learn in school. The first territory was familiar. The physical world itself, viewed from a vantage point, displaced from the body. He could pass through walls, observe people in other rooms, perceive details he would later confirm with them, but there was more. As he advanced, he realized there were other territories populated by beings, landscapes, and sensations that seemed to be molded directly by thought, by emotion, by intention. Some regions were dense, heavy, charged with suffering and confusion, as if they housed minds still trapped by ancient fears. Others were luminous, expansive, filled with a sense of belonging and love that he had never experienced in the physical world. And the more he explored, the clearer it became that common reality, the one we take as the only one, is but a tiny slice of something immensely larger. Imagine for an instant someone who has spent their entire life inside a single room without windows, and who has always believed that the entire universe was that room. That painted wall was the limit of the sky. That low ceiling was the totality of the universe. Now imagine that one day the door opens and the person crosses the threshold, not to leave, just to see, and they discover that there is a hallway, and that the hallway leads to another room, and that from that room one can see a window, and through the window exists an entire sky, with stars, with horizons, with worlds they never imagined. That is exactly the feeling that people who have had expanded consciousness experiences report in different words, in different cultures, in different eras. It does not matter if it was a farmer in rural India, a 17th century Spanish nun, an Amazonian shaman, a contemporary physicist, or a skeptical American executive. The fundamental account is the same. There is more. There is much, much more. And what we are does not end where the skin ends. This is one of the reasons why the full moon of this specific night weighs so heavily on so many people who are beginning to awaken. Because the human organism, especially in more sensitive people, registers subtle changes in the electromagnetic field, in the lunar cycle, in atmospheric pressure, and in factors not yet fully understood, and these changes tend to sharpen perception, to lower the noise, to facilitate that which on other nights would be completely ignored. And here we reach a part of the story that tends to make many people uncomfortable, because it takes expanded consciousness out of the exclusive territory of mysticism and places it directly into official drawers, into files of institutions that for decades treated this subject like any other strategic topic. Documents released over the last few decades have shown that different government agencies around the world dedicated time, money, and researchers to the study, systematic of expanded states of consciousness. They investigated remote viewing techniques. They examined the possibility of obtaining information from altered states. They studied deep meditation protocols, brain synchronization, and sound patterns capable of inducing the brain into specific frequencies. There were programs dedicated to understanding whether a person could, by training their own mind, perceive details of distant places without ever having been there. And although the official conclusions were always carefully packaged in technical and cautious language, any attentive reader of the reports perceives the same thing. Much of what was observed simply does not fit within the classical materialist view. There were results, there was repetition, there was consistency, and there was also, in parallel, a clear choice not to make this knowledge widely accessible to the general population. One can debate the motives. One can discuss the institutional strategies. But the concrete fact is that for a long time, speaking about this research in public was a cause for discredit, laughter, and exclusion from respectable circles. And meanwhile, internally, the study continued. Why does this matter to you on this night of the full moon? It matters because it reveals something that no ordinary motivational video will tell you with the necessary honesty. Your inner potential is not a romantic fantasy. It is, at the same time, a practical reality, observable, investigated by people in laboratory coats, and a spiritual reality felt by ordinary people throughout history. And when you join these two faces, what remains is an overwhelming perception. You are much, much more than you were told. You were born with capacities that no one taught you to develop. And a good part of the weariness, the apathy, and the feeling that something is missing that you carry is not personal weakness. It is the direct effect of having been educated to live in a tiny fraction of yourself. But if this is true, an inevitable question arises. If we have all this potential, if this consciousness extends far beyond the body, if entire territories are waiting to be perceived, why do so many people live imprisoned in small lives, in suffocating routines, in relationships that stifle, in jobs that drain, in internal dialogues that humiliate? Why do most never manage to touch this expansion? The answer, although uncomfortable, is simple and at the same time brutal. Its name is fear. Not the episodic fear, the one that appears in the face of real danger and soon passes. That one is useful. That one was essential for the survival of the species. I'm talking about the other fear, the one that has settled as the backdrop of your life, the diffuse, chronic, almost imperceptible fear that appears in small inner voices every day. The fear of not being enough, the fear of being seen for who you really are, the fear of failing in front of others, the fear of losing what you have achieved, the fear of not having been loved enough, the fear of silence, of the void, of the dark, of death itself, and also, paradoxically, the fear of your own power. Because living small seems safe, accepting the known seems comfortable, repeating the past seems familiar. And although no one likes to admit it, there is a part within every person that prefers old pain to the possibility of expansion, simply because old pain is already known, and expansion is an unpredictable territory. This fear manifests in 1,000 different ways throughout the day. It appears in the anxiety that tightens the chest before an important meeting. It appears in the extreme fatigue that emerges from nowhere when you consider starting something new. It appears in the inner voice that says, "This is not for you. This doesn't work for people like us. Who do you think you are to want this?" It appears in the excess of stimulus, in the infinite scroll of notifications, in the compulsive consumption of tragic news, in the inability to simply sit in silence with yourself for 10 minutes. Everything. This is in essence fear. Fear of encountering in the silence something you do not yet want to see. Fear of discovering, within yourself, something that does not fit into the life you have built thus far. And that is exactly why the full moon portal tonight carries a particular weight. Because this specific configuration, with silvery light flooding everything, with the accumulated exhaustion of the week, with the natural stillness that tends to settle in at this moment of the cycle, creates rare conditions for you to be able, perhaps for the first time in a long time, to observe these fears without being swallowed by them, to see them as you see a wave in the sea. There is no need to fight the wave. You only need to observe that it comes, rises, and goes away. When this happens, something inside lets go. Not all at once, but enough to begin. Transformation, however, is never sustained merely by observing fears. It only gains stability when a force capable of occupying the space that fear leaves behind enters the scene. And this force, as obvious as it may seem when said out loud, is usually the last thing people allow themselves to accept as a real path. It is called love. Not the sentimental love of greeting cards and pop songs, not the idealized love of romantic comedies. Love as a force of internal organization, as a principle of choice, as a basic orientation of thought, word, and action. People who have gone through deep processes of consciousness expansion, whether they be researchers, ancient mystics, or ordinary people who have lived through striking experiences at critical moments in life, tend to converge on the same essential conclusion. Nothing built from fear lasts. Nothing built from love disappears. The intention with which you do each thing is more decisive than the thing itself. You can work many hours a day driven by the fear of not being enough and end up exhausted, resentful, and empty. Or you can work the same hours driven by a clear intention, by a perceived meaning, by a love for your own path, and end up tired but whole. The same gesture, with different intentions, generates completely different lives. And when you begin to notice this in practice, you realize that each small choice throughout the day is a vote you cast for the version of yourself that will exist tomorrow. Picking up your phone upon waking, before even breathing with presence, is a vote. Reacting to the first irritating stimulus without a pause is a vote. Sitting down to eat while savoring the texture of the food, instead of devouring it while scrolling, is a vote. Looking a person in the eye while they speak, instead of thinking about the answer you are going to give, is a vote. Each vote, individually, seems small. Collectively, they draw your life. And most people, when they finally stop to look honestly at the life they have, realize something difficult to accept. It is the direct result of the sum of these small daily votes. The good, the bad, the brilliant, and the painful, everything. And this, although it may seem distressing at first, is, in truth, one of the most liberating pieces of news that exist, because it means the game is never over, that each new day offers a new round of votes, that each full moon in particular offers an especially intense chance to reorient the whole, and that what you have been up to now does not decide what you can still be from here on out. When you begin to perceive all this in a clearer way, a practical question naturally arises. Fine. I understand. I believe. I feel that it makes sense. And now, in practice, what do I do with this? How do I cross this portal? How do I use this specific full moon for something more than just knowing it exists? The answer, although it sounds simple, requires a form of courage that few people are willing to practice. Silence, not as an absence of noise, as a quality of presence. Find a space where no one will interrupt you for at least -15, 20, 30 minutes. If possible, near a window where moonlight can stream in. If not possible, any corner of the house will do, as long as it is yours alone during this interval. Turn off notifications. Turn off the television. Place your phone far enough away that reaching for it requires a deliberate movement. Sit or lie down in a comfortable position, with your spine reasonably aligned, without stiffness. Close your eyes, and start with the most obvious and most neglected thing. Breathe slowly. Inhale through your nose counting to 4. Hold the air counting to 2. Exhale through your mouth counting to 6. No rush, no pressure. Do this about 10 times. You will notice, perhaps even within the first few breaths, that the body begins to release things that had been there hidden for hours, days, weeks. Tension in the jaw, tension in the shoulders, tension in the lower back, a strange feeling in the stomach, tears that appear out of nowhere, for no clear reason. Let it happen. Do not try to understand in that moment. Do not try to name it. Just observe. Next, mentally take a short journey through your body from head to toe, noticing each part without judgment. Your forehead, your eyes, your mouth, your neck, your shoulders, your chest, your abdomen, your hips, your legs, your feet. Where there is tension, breathe toward that point, as if the air were bringing space to that region. When your breathing is deeper, do something that may seem strange, but has a real effect. Choose an intention. Just one, not a list, not 10 wishes, not 10. An intention that represents the turning point you feel deep down, that you are ready to start living. It could be something like, I want to rediscover my inner clarity. It could be, I want to let go of the fear that is holding me back. It could be, I want to trust life again. It could be, I want to realize my own worth. It could be any phrasing that rings true. Repeat this intention mentally, calmly, feeling each word. Not as a request to something distant, as an affirmation to something within, as a seed you plant in the most fertile soil that exists, which is your own silence. As you remain there with eyes closed, with slower breathing, with the intention holding the center of your attention, something very particular tends to happen. It is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. There will be no colored lights, no singing angels, nor grand revelations in the first instance. What happens is more subtle, and precisely because it is subtle, it is so powerful. A kind of calm that seems to come from a deeper place than usual. A sensation of being whole, even if only for a few minutes. A perception that there is within you, a silent observer that has always been there. Even on the worst days, even in the worst decisions, even in the moments when you felt most lost. This observer does not judge you, does not rush you, does not push you. It only observes, and in its presence you can suddenly observe as well. And the simple act of observing with clarity, without reactivity, already begins to change the internal chemistry of who you are. Thoughts that once seemed like absolute commands start to be perceived as passengers on a bus you do not need to take. Emotions that once seemed like tsunamis start to be perceived as waves that rise and fall. Painful memories that once seemed to define who you are start to be perceived as chapters of a much larger story, one that continues to be written now. And when you open your eyes after this interval, something remains. Not everything, of course. Life keeps happening. The bills keep arriving. People continue to be who they are. But something remains. A kind of internal thread that connects this moment to the next. A small flame that, if you decide to feed it with practice, with attention, with coherent choices over the following days, becomes something bigger, and bigger, and bigger. Until, at some point, you look back and you realize that what once seemed distant, almost too mystical to be real, has become your natural way of existing. The full moon of this night, therefore, is not a magical promise that nothing will be denied to you by some distant cosmic decree. That formulation, while catchy, oversimplifies what is actually happening. What this night offers is something rarer and more real, a window of internal and external conditions favorable for you to do what on other nights would have cost more energy, more courage, more discipline. To look within, to let go of what needs to be let go, to consciously choose the next move, to reorient the helm. And when you use this window with seriousness, with presence, with clear intention, the effect is not restricted to the night itself. It extends for days, for weeks, for months. You begin to make different decisions, to react differently to the same people, to identify with more clarity what feeds you and what drains you, to say no where before you said yes out of fear, to say yes where before you said no out of insecurity, to treat yourself with the kindness you always wanted to receive from others, to notice life happening in small details that used to go unnoticed. And it is in this cumulative, silent, persistent process that what some traditions call manifestation, fulfillment, coherence, finally begins to appear not as an exception, but as a trend. Not because the universe made an exception for you, but because you, for the first time in a long time, have stopped operating on mixed signals. You stopped asking for one thing in the morning and contradicting that very same thing with your own body in the afternoon. You began to be deep down the person you always wanted to allow yourself to be. And when that happens, reality has no way of continuing to respond in the same way. People change around you. Opportunities arise from unexpected angles. Meaningful coincidences begin to multiply. And what seemed locked, hopeless, without a future, begins to reorganize itself before your eyes, not because it was magic, but because you began to inhabit a different inner frequency, and the external world naturally responds to who you are, not to who you would like to be. So if you felt, at some point in these words, something moving inside your chest, something remembering that it existed, something demanding attention, something asking to be heard, consider this the most important sign of the week. Do not throw it away. Do not brush it off. Do not outsource it to another day. The full moon of this night will pass. It always passes. But what you do within it can remain. It can become a milestone. It can become a turning point. It can become that moment that, a few years from now, you will remember as the instant when you stopped putting off your own life and began, finally, to live from the inside out. And the beauty of this path is that it does not require any great external revolution immediately. It does not require quitting your job. It does not require moving to another city. It does not require ending relationships or starting others. It starts exactly where you are, with the breath that is happening now, with the silence you choose to cultivate in the coming hours, with the intention you decide to plant before going to sleep. Everything else unfolds from there, in its own time, in its own rhythm, in its own measure. Because the most essential truth about all of this, the truth that runs through Robert Monroe, runs through careful researchers, runs through ancient mystics, runs through spiritual traditions from different continents, is one and the same. You are not a victim of reality. You are on levels you are only beginning to perceive, an active participant in what your experience becomes. When you change, deeply, in silence, with coherence, without drama, without theater, without needing to prove anything to anyone, Your whole life begins to change with you, not at the pace that anxiety would like, at the pace that real growth demands. And a night like this, a full moon like this, a window like this, are precious opportunities to take the first step or the next step, or the step that has been stalled for too long. Take a deep breath. Look up, if you can, and notice the light that is illuminating this night. Remember that that light is just the reflection of a greater light, and that inside you there exists a similar light, waiting patiently, without hurry, without demands, just for your recognition. When you finally turn your face toward it, after so many years of looking away, it does not ask why you took so long. It simply receives you, and begins, together with you, the chapter that was still waiting to be lived.